Now, how I kind of set this little discussion up is we'll start with the brief history of cannabis, kind of how it got to where it was, consumption methods, different dosing, and the current research that's there. And since this, of course, is a discussion, at any point, if you have a question, like that was said, please stop us, redirect us, because this is about you. So if you're not getting anything out of it, then
it's wasted wind.
It's just us talking, which
Yeah,
I'm
is.
okay with too.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. So we were talking briefly about the history of cannabis, and the first documented indication of it is about 5,000 years ago in Romania, China, Asia. And from there, it spread to the rest of the world, basically based on how it treated malaria and menstrual cramps. And it would be burnt in incense containers throughout Europe. And Native Americans, as someone in the room noticed, would use it in ceremonial purposes. And from there, that's when kind of the East and the West, instead of burning incense, saw that the Native Americans were using pipes. And this is kind of the culmination of what you see today with peace pipes and smoking pipes. And even though we've known about this for 5,000 years, we've cultivated it, we've made it more potent, really, the concept of marijuana as an evil drug is a fairly recent invention. Just a real brief overview of it, the historic prohibition of it was in 1937, and it reached its pinnacle with the Controlled Substance Act in 1970, and that is what classified it as a Schedule I substance. And after that, as you all know, the counterculture of the 1960s took over from there, and it became more of just a recreation. It became almost, sign of liberty. Then it entered into the more mainstream of Grateful Dead, joints, pipes, became almost like a lifestyle. Then you have the 1970s, Marinol was produced, and I'm not sure if you can speak on that.
Well, just to let you know, first of all, when you speak of the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, what that really is telling you, that's a controlled Scheduled I drug. I, as a physician, and I'm fully licensed to write for all classes of medication except, and no physician can do this unless they have, and this is very few for a Schedule I. I can write 2 through 5, okay? 1 is, for example, well, it's not only that, but you'd have some of the many other drugs that we cannot touch or speak about. So it was almost put there by the federal government and kind of locked away. So we can't even talk about it, can't even do research on it. No way. So there isn't anything that we really know except what we've experienced or others have experienced before us to tell us. And that's kind of where it's sat since 1970. And again, being locked up prior to that, 1937. However, in recent times, as you know, with this being with the states going the way they are, that is letting all of that up. But a Scheduled I drug cannot be written for by really anybody. So it's not like even a morphine. It's not even cocaine. Those are class 2. Okay, so they can be written by someone like us. We cannot even touch marijuana on a federal level. But that is letting up now, and I think that's going to be a problem. It was classified. It was basically misclassified in the first place.
So let's see. After the 1970s, as decades kind of progressed, and as you say, anecdotally, everyone started to wisen up about what it really was. We slowly had globally medical independent research on cannabis, and where it's funny and ironic, where a lot of our first research began for cannabis was from the US government trying to get bad research against cannabis. And what they found, one of the biggest researches they did was a 35-year research on lung cancer and how it's related to cannabis. And after 35 years, the researcher, he was an Israeli that came over for this, and he said, I have absolutely nothing for you, because we actually found that cannabis smokers had a decrease in lung cancer. So most of our early research actually came from attempted slanderous research studies by the government that turned out to be pro-cannabis.
Now, to throw that forward into last year, there was some research that recently came out, last year's research, that showed there was a decrease in some, and I can't tell you specifically what cancer it was, but in tumor cells. Now, I would never sell the idea on the use of cannabis to any of you here with the idea that it's going to affect something like that. No, this is all recent research. This is all, and we kind of known that anyway, but just to let you know that the things that we knew from the past, and this is a good example of that, that probably did do that, is now becoming true to validate this.
And so now it's state to state. So states are now given the ability to move around the Schedule I drug. And as you know, Michigan is one of those states since 2008. And what has happened now to cannabis is, before it was just about being able to get your hands on it, being able to come by it safely. But now, since it's more readily available, everything is about consistency. Science is starting to tinker with, how do you make dosing consistent? How do you make the effects that you get today replicate it to tomorrow? So that is where we are at with cannabis. It's all about how do you make this medicinal and get into the science of it? How does it affect each person? Because there are so many different factors that contribute to how cannabis interacts with your body in that particular time of that particular day, and how you're feeling in that particular moment. There is something they always say, when you smoke, you should always be looking at set and setting, how you feel and where you are. That's kind of how we always start with smoking and testing.
But I don't know how many of you would have a Michigan medical marijuana card, but on the application, if you filled it out yourself, you'll also see a clear example is in my realm in ophthalmology, where one of the boxes you can check has either been like chronic pain, but it's also been for glaucoma. Okay, and it's been used for glaucoma, I mean, for a long time, more than it's been used by many people for that. But again, part of that goes back to the dosing, and that's where I think a lot of people are getting into that, to get that honed down to a certain level so we know exactly how much, how little we're taking. And with glaucoma, that's been always a difficulty for someone, but I do have some people that are adamant they will take no other medications, no other treatment unless it's cannabis. And I have several people like that. So I follow them with that as well, and have for years. But there's a clear example on your own application in the state of Michigan of a disease entity that is basically used and is recognized by the state as a chronic issue that can be medicinally treated. And so therefore you check that box, that qualifies you as a medical cannabis patient.
Now, the interesting part of how cannabis actually interacts with your body is a relatively new discovery, which is remarkable medically because it's this entire system that we have in our body called the endocannabinoid system, and it essentially regulates homeostasis. And that's how cannabis interacts with your body. Endo meaning internal, and cannabinoid meaning cannabis-like. So really, you already have a cannabinoid system in your body with CB1 and CB2 receptors. And what's fascinating is that there is a plant that exists in nature that you can grow in your backyard or basement that works with your endocannabinoid system beautifully. And it allows your body to shut off and turn on certain neurons, certain sensations, certain feelings to try and maintain what it views is your homeostasis. And that was actually the thing that, this is a little side tangent, that brought me into cannabis, because finding out that this plant can do all these things with your body, it's just incredible. It's incredible. It's no wonder why this is revered as the way it is.
And I might add too, on that note, that many of the things that we've had in the past, okay, and when I started, I've been in medicine 45 years. And so what happens is that I remember back then, many of the things we have now are basically chemical derivatives, hybrids, you know, from many of the big pharma companies. Years ago, we used to use many plant-derived medications. I don't know if you've ever used those transderm patches, for example, for vertigo, balance, things like that. That is scopolamine, and that comes off of a plant. We also use a medication. I don't know if any of you have gotten dry from treatments, mouth, nose, throat. There's a medication I write a lot of. It's called pilocarpine. Pilocarpine, that's the generic name. Saligen is the trade name, and it helps you with your secretions. Okay, it's a parasympathomimetic drug. It too exactly comes off of a plant in the Amazon jungle. Has anybody heard of foxglove or digitalis? Okay, that's been around a long time too. And that comes off of a plant. That is what we use when people go into congestive heart failure. You've ever heard of digitalis? Okay, or digoxin or any of those? That's foxglove. Okay, and those are naturally occurring plants. But as you've seen over the years, we've gotten away from that because, and I'm not anti-big pharma, but we've gone more from our plant-based, regular, kind of like our foods. I mean, we've gone into more processing and then staying away from the plant-based stuff. And here now we're going back talking about something that's naturally derived as a plant, okay, that has many receptors in our bodies. Now, whether it's a benefit to you as an individual or not is remains to be seen. So I don't say it works for everybody, but certainly we have a system now, an endocannabinoid system, that is a receptor system for when we take this in that happens in us. So that also tells us through our evolutionary cycle as humans, okay, that sometime before, okay, we've had this, because why would we have an endocannabinoid receptor system in our bodies? Because it had existed in us as humans from before.
Now, what's important to note about that too is that since this is still so federally taboo, and
it's lightening up.
It's lightening up, but it is still very common for a lot of doctors to not study the endocannabinoid system, it not be taught. So it's very important that whoever your doctor is, they understand how important this is.
Oh, it's really not known, but I think they don't know exactly why. But my suspicion is there are medications we take. Many of the drops you take, they suspect it works on the outflow system. For example, when we make fluid in our bodies, it's very much like our spinal canal. It's actually the same fluid. It's aqueous, and it's produced by ciliary bodies, much like our cerebral spinal fluid is. And what it does is it percolates behind or next to the lens, back through the pupil and into what we call the angle. It's called Schlemm's canal. It's that outflow they think that many of these medications work on. Some of the older medications, for example, pilocarpine, pulled the pupil closed, which pulled that angle, which pulls it apart a bit to let more fluid drain out of the eye. They think that glaucoma is affected by marijuana somehow that way. They're not sure about that, but they know that with its use, it does reduce intraocular pressure. And that's how they feel. Some of the other stuff that we use work on our acid-base metabolism. They're carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. And if you know chemistry at all, there used to be if you could think of it, you go from base to acid, you know, and if you've ever seen that or worked with that chemically at all, that's what it does in your body. It also affects your taste because our taste is affected by that acid-base system and the pH system too. And so it works on all that when it gets into our eye as well. So when you take drops, it affects that chemically by doing that. It's the outflow. So glaucoma is affected by cannabis, I think the same way. At least that's what's been said.
So
did I answer that or did I confuse it more? Thank you for that. Thank you, you're a kind man. I appreciate that.
There are a lot of differences, and especially when you get talking about the specifics of cancer treatment and cell treatment, it's so different from one strain to the next. They have found that people who create a tincture for themselves can do the same dose of THC and CBD, but if it's a different plant, they use a different plant for once, but they still have the same dose of CBD and THC, completely different effects. So the plants themselves are all different.
Variable, right.
But the medicine, the THC, CBD, is all the same. Medical, recreational, adult use, all the different names you've ever heard for it, it's the same thing. Now, there is a slight distinction between hemp and cannabis. Hemp is really the same thing as cannabis again, but it is very low THC. To be hemp, all it is cannabis, weed, that is, I think it's 0.3% THC. Otherwise, it's the exact same plant. It's actually, the state has made it quite easy to get your medical card. I'll send a link over to you guys later. And if you just want to go see a doctor in person to do it, I think they can they schedule with you and you'll take care of it?
I would do it for as a medical provider. And I don't do a lot of them. I'm not in my practice, per se a pot doc, but I will for my patients. And I do sign them off for that. You could ask your own provider if they would do that for you. Actually, your own doctor. I think it has to be a DO or an MD to sign off on this for that purpose. And you could ask your own to see if they do that. If there's any difficulty or you feel like you would like to, I'd be happy to help with that if you'd like to, certainly if the indications are there. Cool part about that is it comes back to us because see, if you're working with someone or you're talking to them, you find out. And again, it's like Kevin said, plants and people are variable. So, what works for one may not work for the other, but maybe a different combination of the same thing, percentage wise, would work better for that one than that one. And it was just like Ken was saying for his glaucoma, the same thing. How much, how little, and in what form do we have to give for that purpose? So it gets into be that. So you do trial and error. And boy, I'll tell you, once people find where that level is and they hit on it, they won't move. Believe me, because they get the relief or whatever they're trying to, take care of. And I'll tell you, it's wonderful to see that. And then it also has freed them up from their other things that they didn't want to take. For example, the narcotics. I'll tell you, I've seen that more often than not with narcotics. And I'm happy to see that. I'm not a big narcotics fan. One says, does cannabis impact neuropathy? I guess it depends on what neuropathy you're talking about. There's all kinds of it. First of all, there's the kind that let's just take a nerve itself, whether it's affected by, everybody, they've been reading the papers lately, they think the coronavirus is the only thing that affects nerves. Well, that's the first time I've heard that, because in my experience, every virus affects the nerves and can affect it long term. I don't know if any of your friends or you have ever had herpes or shingles. Okay, tell me that doesn't have a long-term effect on many people. It sure does. If anybody had there's an old term called tic de la rue. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. That is trigeminal neuralgia. Okay, and that can come on for various reasons and things like that. It's awful. I mean, I don't think people can't even sustain life with using some of that when you're talking about, so they're hypersensitive with headaches and things like that. On the other hand, you can have what we call hyposthesia, where they don't have any sensation at all. And if you've talked to anybody that's had that, for example, somebody with diabetic neuropathy, they lose sensation. So it's just the other way around. So again, how does cannabis affect either side of that? Is it, like they're hypersensitive with a lot of pain, or hyposthetic, as we call them, where they're low pain? Well, I think what it does, it affects that only in the sense that I don't think it takes away the effects of the neuropathy. For example, many of these neuropathies that they have, depending on what kind of nerves they're affecting, you have different nerves, motor nerves, to move things. You have sensory nerves to feel things. You have proprioceptive ones that tell you balance. We have the retina, which the only purpose of that retina doesn't to feel, it's to see. It's those kinds of things. So what nerves are affected and in what way? It doesn't really impact the function. I think what it does is it can, and I think studies are going to come out, what happens when you have a nerve conduction, okay, it's usually a electrochemical reaction. For example, plus minus, and it propagates. So if you go back to the periodic table, that'll give you a clue how this works. Some of those are minus, some are plus, and it propagates that. And that's how it moves along an axon or nerve fiber. So cannabis can affect that. And I think what it does is I think you're going to find out that in neuropathy, just like when we talked about tumor cells, I think you're going to see there's going to be changes in that, and probably it'll be changes to the impediment of these nerve fibers and its axonic flow, they call that. And I think it'll improve that. And I think that's what it's going to come out. But that's conjecture, and I really don't want to push that to say it's a cure-all for that, but it will and does affect neuropathy.
A lot of the anecdotal research that was coming back was when you take something like Vicodin, it kind of just numbs everything. You still feel the pain, the nerve is still there, but it kind of just dulls it. With cannabis, what they've noticed is, again, they think that it affects the neurotransmitters in your brain from blocking and increasing, depending on who you are, how you're feeling that day, certain neurotransmitters. So it helps your brain switch on and off certain things, again, to try and create a homeostasis within itself, to try and balance itself back out. So let's see. There was we'll make a custom and recommendation for each client. One of the questions was, so are you saying that you will make a custom and recommendation for each client? 100%, absolutely.
Well, you have to. You really have to, because like we just taught, we are individuals. Even though he and I are blood related with our gene pool, we're still different. Also, I have several more years of burning things up in my body from my habits or my gene pool or things I've done, how I've eaten, So anyway, that brings me to today. When you ingest something, that's affected too. And so you see so it's all variability. So yes, you have to almost custom it for each and every individual, and that's, again, there was another question. If we could freely buy recreational cannabis, why get a card? Well, I'll tell you, you're finding out one of the differences right now. You're right. You can go do it on your own and whether you have a medical cannabis card or recreational, it works either way. But the reason you use a medical card is because that puts you into the realm of what we're talking about right now. And we pay more attention to that side of things. And yes, that's where the custom application of THC and CBD is. And that's why we would do it that way.
Coming back to where we kind of started with all these large companies coming into play, what they are doing is they are creating a service that we need. You're able to get your cannabis from them, but what they're doing is they are simply, again, pushing THC. You can go into one of these places and mostly you will not find anything with CBD in it. It's
how high do you want to get? It's how high do you want to get?
It's stoner culture that's prevailed. So we're trying to keep the advocacy of it alive, the whole plant as a remedy alive. It's
just very cool this way, how it can really work if you think about it a bit, how this plant, like many of the plants I aforementioned, also this can do this as well. Another thing that I want to tell you, if you lived through the 60s, okay, and you remember all the tie-dye people with the ponytails and all that stuff, remember those people that had the headbands on and all that, and the hippified stuff and the peace signs and all that stuff and everything. That ain't today. They're gone. A few years ago, they tried to exist, but unless they were big corporate, that's what's happening. They're getting into big corporations now, and with the money, and they're kind of pushing through. As a matter of fact, it's gotten so bad that individuals such as us, many of them were put into a position where they obtained a license through their effort with LARA, the state licensing agency, to get that. And then they go to a locale, they get everything set up. Then big company comes in, not big pharma, but a big company, a big pot company with billions of dollars, literally billions of dollars. What they were doing is they were coming in and, all the local that would set this up, get their licenses and stuff, then they come in and throw money at them and buy them all out. So the whole thing is these companies are trying to become the next McDonald's of pot and put one on every corner to sell pot, irregardless of what was the past. Now they're going to try to sell the past to you to think you may be in part of that and getting into that culture. But there's not a lot of places like that exist anymore because they've all been bought out with big money.
Exactly. And to go back to the question about custom recommendations for each client, that's exactly what it is. It is simply a recommendation. Nobody knows you better than you. and how you wake up and how you feel that morning, how the pain is that morning, how the anxiety is that morning. And it's slightly overwhelming to think that we are giving you all these recommendations and it might change every day. Your dosing might change every day. To try and protect it's debilitating anxiety. And there are days when
he gets it from his father.
I do. It's natural. So there will be days when I wake up and I dose. There'll be other days when I wake up and I don't dose till afternoon or in the evening. And that's what all of this
well,
is.
but tell him what you dose. Tell him what you do. He doesn't get high. That's the funny thing. He does an admix of CBD, okay, which is primarily CBD, what you said, with a touch of THC. Mm-hmm. For him, that works. Now, the THC doesn't get him high. It knocks it off with the CBD, and it sustains itself throughout the day. So that's what he's talking about. He does an admix of that. And then again, he changes that a little bit as the need arises.
And then, I'll make one more point about the medical card, and then I'll start talking about THC, CBD, and a little bit more of the dosing. So there are really 3 points right now for the medical card. One is what he mentioned earlier about how you really want this to be medicinal and you want to be an advocate for yourself. And you can really do that more so on the medical side of things. Mm-hmm. The second point is, with all these large companies coming in, there is a massive drought in the recreational cannabis stores because all these bigger companies wanted to push for recreational and adult use as soon as possible.
Bigger money. And they get, by the way, with medical cannabis, there is not usually a local tax. So a lot of the locals push for adult use or recreational because they get taxed more on the sale of that. And therefore, there's more revenues on a local, township, city, state level for that.
So
that's part of what drives it.
And as a patient with a medical card, you can negate that tax. So if you do not have a medical card, you have to pay a 10% excise tax. If you do have a medical card, you do not have to pay the 10% excise tax. And the third second reason was there is such a short supply with recreational cannabis right now. If you have your medical card, you are opening yourself to way more products, way more availability, way more CBD THC ratios. So I always recommend, even if people come into a adult use store, always recommend them to get their medical card. One, because it's safer to have, and even though it is legal in Michigan, law enforcement is still touch and go, so it's always just safe to have a medical card. You get a better choice of products, and you don't have to pay the 10% excise tax.
Well, and on top of that too, you'll have better control of what you're putting in your body because you'll think about it more. With recreational, you're on your own. We'll just see you later. Here, sell it, go. With us in the medicinal thing as well, we'll do recreational too. But the thing is I think the cool part is with medicinal, you'll get that, you'll know what you're taking in, and you're going to vary it from time to time. But that's the cool part about it, is you'll be able to see what you're doing with your body and how your body reacts with the way you currently are.
The good news is, if you go and buy it and hope you do it right, there is something called, and I always forget the acronym for this, I apologize, it's the LD50. And what it is if you have 50% of whatever product you're taking, chemical, drug, water, it's whatever it'll take 50% for you to be 50% likely to die from it. And everything has this LD50. Even water has an LD50. Cannabis does not have an LD50. There is no possible way for you to overdose from something like this. So the good news is, if you go out and try it, try different edibles, try different tinctures, try different transdermal patches, you will not overdose. There's a joke in cannabis culture that they say the only way you can die from cannabis is if you literally get crushed by it. That's
Yeah, if a big bale of marijuana falls on you, you might die from that.
So please know, whatever we say going forward, as long as you procure it from safe and reliable sources, it's practically low risk to you.
And that's another thing. One thing that is good, and if you've been around since the 60s, what has existed primarily is what everyone would call a black market. And it still exists. It's still flourishing. You'll still find it. However, with what Laura has done, although they've been slow, and that's one of the reasons there isn't a lot of product out there available. So it drives the prices up at many of the places that exist currently. But what's happened too is that now with the certified product, when you say that, there's no chemicals, there's no bugs, there's none of the other stuff that you might find in the black market, because it just gets clipped from somebody's bush. They may have grown it outside. They may have grown it on a toxic swamp site. They may have, but who knows? You don't know where it came from, and it's not certified, so it's not tested. And that's what the certification process does through places that sell certified product. And that's another good thing with medicinal, because I know for sure that will happen. It'll probably happen. It will happen with recreational, but it is absolutely assured with medical cannabis.
And right now, Michigan has the most stringent testing for cannabis in the U.S., which is very good. We test for a lot of heavy metals, and a lot of other states right now do not. Let's see. And as far as I know it seems almost overwhelming to try and tackle something like this on your own, as far as dosing and combining and growing. The doctor will get you the card, but the hope is that the provisioning center, the dispensary, will hopefully walk you through it. And until we have an open one in Alpena, I will be more than happy to walk you through what I can, tell you the recipes that I know that I make for myself. And if I can't help, or if there's a specific need that I don't personally know, there's many other people that I can connect you with.
Oh, yeah, on a national level.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, what's happening is just like the medicine in general, everybody's specializing. So we know nationally who to talk. And what's kind of cool, we've been kind of on the sides of this for so many years, that many of these national level people are people that have been in this since the 60s. And they've morphed and changed through this so they can continue on with this and not just be the ones that you buy how high you get. No, these are people that have actually specialized and have seen the merits of a plant-based medicinal cannabis purpose. And I think that's valuable. So we have those kinds of connections, and we use those even now with our patients. So even now, we would recommend to you, if you want to, tomorrow, tonight, or if anybody were called, we'd be happy to help.
Take over for a little bit. So I was going to talk about administration, how to take it, different options to take it, but I think I'll just skip right to dosing, and then we can kind of circle back if we need to.
Okay.
So dosing, the fascinating part with cannabis is it's actually dose dependent. So it's not like most drugs where if you take more of it, the same effects will simply increase, right? If you take a narcotic, the more narcotic you take, the more it simply affects you. Cannabis is dose dependent, so it changes, the effects of it change depending on how much you take. So if you take maybe 2 milligrams, you may have mild relief. If you take 15 milligrams, you may have more relief, but then you also start to get to euphoria. More than that, you may have more relief, more euphoria, but then you might have more stress, more anxiety. So there's this little bell curve that is kind of how dosing cannabis goes. And the key to it is to try and find where you fit. Where is your perfect, they call it a therapeutic window, where your therapeutic window is right at the top of that curve. Because if you do way too much, you're going to get, the dip. You're going to get a little bit of the anxiety, the lethargy, the lack of motor skills. Again, since this is already something in your system, it will pass. Any negative side effects you feel, particularly from cannabis, they will pass as your body passes through the endocannabinoid system. And what a lot of smokers do, they do what's called a flush, which is simply 2 days of not consuming any cannabinoids from cannabis. And so it resets your natural endocannabinoid system. And again, I know this is a lot. I'm still learning so much about this every day. So again, if I'm talking too fast, or please yell at me to circle back to something. It might be an uncomfortable evening. One of the things I always recommend people doing is if cannabis is going to be a part of your life and you are going to try and incorporate it and test it to see how it works with you, I always recommend people have black pepper, because the terpenes in black pepper actually flush the THC from your system. So if you get too high, taking coarse black pepper kernels and running it in your mouth, that helps. Another thing that helps is doing something that you would normally love doing, watching a movie. I know this sounds, it's not a cure-all, but it's kind of just waiting for it to pass. The other thing, which is fascinating, if you do get too high from dosing, CBD, a straight dose, I always tell people to keep a tincture or something that's high CBD, because what CBD does, so THC is almost, it looks like triangles almost. And so it gets stuck in your receptors, in your CB1 and CB2 receptors. And that's what gets you high. And when you have CBD is more, the molecule is more circular. And what that does is it'll actually flush out the triangles that are stuck in your CB1 receptors, the THC. The CBD will flush that out, so you'll hopefully get less high. It'll make you come down a little bit faster. There are all these little tricks that you'll learn as you go on, and there are so many different forums and Facebook groups that people are sharing different, cold weather. Some people say it brings you down faster if you dose too high. But the main thing to remember is that cannabis is dose dependent, and there are charts to get you going. There are charts for how you dose edibles, how you dose joints. But the main thing is, since you want to be in control of the dosing, it really depends on what your needs are. So do you have full body, do you have full body nerve pain? Well, then you'll probably be more, you'd be better to choose a edible, or smoking, or vaping. If you have very pain specific, specific pain area, you might want a salve or a lotion or a topical. What was interesting, I was trying to find this, you want cannabis to go to the very specific organ that you're having the trouble with. And what some people are doing is, if they have kidney issues, they will mix it with a calcium supplement and then take that. If you're having prostate problems, you take cannabis and mix it with supplements that are absorbed in that area. Some people are finding a lot of help with transdermal patches, or suppositories are coming into fashion now. So it's really what works for you. The main thing is, whatever you do, you want to mix it with fatty acids. So if you're baking it, if you're digesting it, CBD and THC cling to fatty acids. So the fattier the cooking oil, usually MCT oil is great for this, or coconut oil is fantastic because it actually holds cannabis better than butter does. Holds the cannabinoids better than butter does. That is kind of how you want to look at this. Whatever fattier oil you can bake with, consume with, and that's how you want to get it to the certain part of your body you need. back to THC and CBD, my apologies. So THC is more of the psychoactive property, the high. That's the one that'll stimulate your appetite, where you get the munchies from. And that has been shown to decrease pain, decrease anxiety. But again, if you do too much, it can increase anxiety. CBD, on the other hand, is non-psychoactive, and it does.
That means you don't get high.
Yep.
Right.
And that has been shown to have incredible anti-inflammatory properties, anti-seizure, anti-pain, antioxidant, neuroprotective properties. And now, although they're finding about 144 right now different cannabinoids in the plant, the two main players, the two ones that always get center stage, are the THC and CBD. Those are the ones you really want to focus on when you look at dosing and the ratio. I found a tincture that I like, which is, simple ethanol tincture, put under your tongue, and it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So 50% CBD, 50% THC. And that works for my anxiety. Now, my mom, who uses it for anxiety, that is far too much for her. So she needs something like a 20-to-1 or a 30-to-1. And unfortunately,
more CBD.
Yes.
Less THC, no high, again, more CBD.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's where you have to play with it. And the big thing that's coming up right now is low dosing. We talked about something called microdosing. I'm not sure how prevalent that is, how many people know about it, but that's kind of the gold standard where we are at right now, is the idea of microdosing. So you can supplement your life minimally, you don't get high, but you still feel the positive effects of cannabis. And so that's what I'll do in the mornings when I have anxiety. I will simply microdose an edible, a small edible, maybe 2.5 milligrams, which is minimal. And, if you don't feel it within an hour, you increase the dose. And if you need something more immediate, instead of an edible, which can take an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, depending on how your metabolism works, you can hit the pain immediately with smoking it. As your lungs absorb it, as very, very large organ, the tissue will absorb it immediately. So when you're talking about dosing, it kind of goes back to how you're consuming it and how fast you want it. And I can talk about this. We'll keep talking about this, but the best thing to do, honestly, I have this really nice little chart that shows dosing options, consumption options, that will lay this out far more clearly than I ever can.
Might I also add, as when you're taking this, just so there's no confusion, many people are now starting to what we call vape it. Now, vaping, there's different kinds of vaping. You'll hear these people that are buying pens, for example, that have it in it. There's no smell to it, so you'll see people using these at different functions and things like that. Oftentimes, and what happened in recent times, and I think it's been squelched quite a bit, is many of the oils that were in this, it not only had THC in there, but there was also, like, for example, we heard that there was vitamin E. Let's just simply put, many of these oils that were in these vapors were ingested. Now they're oils. So when you ingest them into your alveoli of your lungs, you're basically coating it with oil, and you're not allowing oxygen to be absorbed into your lungs because it's coated with oil on the inside. That's where a lot of the problems were with that. The vaping I am speaking of is a little bit better. And this goes back to the very nature of the plant. What happens is you go back to the use of THC, and then you find out that what is the melting point of THC. So vaping, in this case, you're taking something solid and you're skipping a phase. So when you melt something solid, it usually goes into a liquid, and then if you keep heating it, it goes into a vapor. In this case, if you heat it high enough, okay, and that's usually about 180 degrees Celsius or about 350 degrees Fahrenheit, it will take the cannabis plant and just take the triomes that are off that, melt them and vaporize it. That's called sublimation. And then it goes into a pure vapor of THC. That's all it is. So you're not getting any of the plant. You're not getting any of that. when you inhale that. It's like smoking, but you're only inhaling the vapor of the sublimated THC. Then that is probably one of the best deliveries. And because you're going to a mucous membrane, your alveoli, things like that, and you ask anybody that's a drug user, that is rapid transit to the body. That is probably one of the quickest routes of delivery, and it's probably almost as quick as when we do something what we call IV. You know, more so than topical, more so than having it go through your alimentary canal being broken down by our stomach. This is rapid transit. So again, that kind of vaporing is well received, and it's healthier for you than doing the other type of vaping and or smoking.
So what was, to complicate matters more,
That's yes.
Will cannabis lower cholesterol?
Yes.
Yes.
Next question.
I can, I'll write that down. I can send you.
No, it's been, they've had studies, and again, it's one of those recent things, and I never would have suspected it would have had anything to do with cholesterol, but I had recently come across something where they had said that it does. Now, I'd like to look more into that. And again, I would never promote this to any of you as a patient of mine as a cure-all for lowering cholesterol, curing this, curing that. No, we use it for a symptom complex. You attack the symptom complexes, and then what you're hoping is that it does affect the disease entity for which you're taking and working with the symptom complex.
The risks to taking cannabis, especially if you're on other medication, is like most anything else, medication interaction, how it will affect the current medications that you are on. One of the things to remember too is you had this in Colorado when it became legal. You had a lot of people taking these massive amounts of doses through one cookie. Like one cookie would be 300 milligrams of cannabis, and you have someone on blood pressure medicine taking one of these cookies. Now, what cannabis does when you consume it, it spikes the heart rate at the beginning. So you feel, you know, these jitters, you feel excited, and then it goes down to homeostasis. So one of the things I always like to tell people is, one, first consult your doctor to see if it, you know, it may interact with anything. But if you have psychoses, or if you have heart issues, that's something to always look at, as it will eventually come back down to homeostasis and give you this calming euphoric effect. But always right when your body takes in these endocannabinoids, or I'm sorry, these cannabinoids into your endocannabinoid system, it spikes your heart rate.
It's almost like there's an excitement of the body when this is taken in, and then it will do this as a side effect, I think, is an increased heart rate and things like that. Many of the things that I see as side effects from this, there are many people that can't tolerate cannabis. You'll hear people, what it does is it suppresses many of the things in our bodies, and it suppresses our, let's put it this way, our sensorum. And when it does that, you let your guard down on many of the other things that keep us. So for example, anxiety, let's use that as an example. Much of our success as humans is driven by our own anxieties, but sometimes that just goes way out of control, like a fast freight train running out of town. How do you stop it? Well, oh boy, good luck. You know, it's like one of those things. And so cannabis will bring that down and kind of do that. But in doing that, you're also knocking off other things that you're not going to pay attention to, or your body won't as well. Again, I think that's a side effect that is not desirable that I see. And I think people get injured. They do stupid things. Oh my gosh. You know, they talk about people, you know, the side effects of drugs. Have you seen people that it crack me up? They call it a gateway to the bad drug. Well, you know, the worst thing I'd seen somebody on cannabis do, they got violent because they were trying to rip the door off the refrigerator because they had the munchies. That was the worst I've seen somebody do, you know, something like that. I've never seen anybody become hostile on cannabis. As a matter of fact, it's the other way around, but that also can be a drawback too, because it lets our guard, our natural guard, down. And I have not seen an allergy to it, but I suppose there could be an allergy to cannabis too as well. And also don't forget, when you're getting especially black market cannabis, you don't know what you're getting exactly and what it may be mixed with. You'd be surprised what comes. Some people will sell and hand out what we call blunts. Okay, and that's where you take a leaf over the top of this stuff. Sometimes people admix things in there. I can remember when I was in medical in Chicago, we had a bunch of people that were coming into the emergency room there. Now, again, this is 45 years ago. Okay, they were coming to the emergency room after they smoked pot that was laced with morphine, ketamine, Valium. What they do is they take this stuff, they'd open it up, pour it on it, put it in the oven, bake it, and then smoke it. And so we get a lot of that too. So was that the side effect of the cannabis, or was that a side effect of the medications, of how their behavior was and how they did? And you're right, it can be bad because people aren't controlling themselves and they lose control many times when they're on cannabis. And those are the people that I think they're not, that's not my experience with the medical cannabis people. I think the medical cannabis people are more calculated. I think they want to have a certain effect they want, and they have something desired that they're trying to change on themselves. So they're very calculating in how they do it. So if there was any potential side effect or adverse effect, they would back away quickly. The people that I've seen in the 60s and 70s, and maybe you have too, were out to get high, and it was as high as you can get. So you're going to see a lot of problems when it's taken that way. And just like it would be with any narcotic, gosh, if we went after narcotics, and I've seen this too, where they take it overabundance of it, because if one good, 10 is better. You know, it's one of those things. And so, you know, we get that with the cannabis business too. So you're going to see the side effects from that as well. So I think there are drawbacks to it. Yes, I agree.
One of the things that they're not quite sure about either is THC, CBD. It can block different enzymes that help metabolize drugs. So that's something to also keep in mind, depending on what drugs you are, if they need longer metabolizing times, and THC and CBD may block those. It's rare, but there are some drugs. I know some doctors who are putting their patients through chemo. Some will have them stop medical cannabis until the first degradation of chemotherapy in the liver, so you don't have high blood levels of chemo. But most of the research I've done, they like to use it in conjunction with chemo at some point. Maybe not at the same time, but in conjunction with. The other, not, I don't want to say risk, but issue that THC may have is in developing brains. Anyone under the age of 15 or under, there's still uncertainty about how that affects the developing brain. CBD, all the other 143 known cannabinoids do not have any issue. You see a lot of kids with Alzheimer's that they give high doses of CBD with a little THC too, and it works beautifully. But high THC doses with schizophrenics and young developing minds, those can be kind of the issues.
Another thing that I'd like to point out, the FDA has approved medical cannabis in different levels for the use in pediatric seizures of sorts. There's certain kinds that it's been approved for. It actually really has been approved as a route of treatment for these things. So again, something like that goes back into when we're talking about the neuropathy and the nervous system and things like that. Yes, it does have an effect. I just can't quantify that when you ask me about neuropathy, because there isn't a lot out there, but I do know that works. Another thing that's been approved for in children, although we cautiously approach its use in children, is autism. There's actually a society that their main go-to now as a source of alternate treatment is cannabis, and they use it in autism in children.
They may enhance the medications. They may actually work better, so you can take less. But there are some medications, and this is what you'd have to talk to your doctor about, that may have a hard time metabolizing already, and CBD may make it harder to metabolize. One of the things I want to talk about too, for THC and CBD, there's something called the entourage effect, and I'm not sure if anyone's heard of that, but it's when and kind of going off what we were talking about just now, when you have a singular cannabinoid like THC, it has its effects. It's anti-inflammatory, anti-nausea, but if you combine it with CBD or CBN or CBG, it works even better. And that's called the entourage effect. So if you have one cannabinoid like THC, it works, it gets you high, but you add a little bit of CBD to that and it works more effectively. Same with CBD. If you just have CBD, it has anti-inflammatory, it has calming properties. But if you add a little bit of THC to it, it makes the CBD even more potent. And that's what they call the entourage effect, which is, it makes sense because we're not just treating a single portion of a person, right? You're treating the whole person, because right when you start treating pain, well, then that leads to something else. So the entourage effect makes sense because you have this whole influx of cannabinoids that are entering your system and helping in like a myriad of different ways. We have found out that CBN, that's a lesser known cannabinoid, helps with sleep. CBG helps more with appetite. So as more research comes in, we're starting to pinpoint these different cannabinoids and what they specifically do, but they all work better in conjunction with each other, and that's the entourage effect. So when you go in for medical CBD or THC, it's always better to have a little bit of a ratio with the other cannabinoids. So I think one of them on here was actually about buying CBD. When you go to buy CBD, the main things you want to look for are third-party tested, because anyone can say it's CBD right now, and it's snake oil. They don't.
It's not regulated.
So you want to make sure it is third-party tested, and a good third-party test will actually have a barcode or a website you can go to where you can see that batch from that bottle and what the exact tests were. And it's unfortunate that as consumers, we have to do this much research on our own, but where the market stands right now, that's kind of your best bet.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing you want to look for with buying CBD particular is full spectrum is what you're looking for, because that when it is full spectrum, it means they haven't stripped the other cannabinoids out. So if you have CBD isolate, that means it is just CBD. It's kind of like white rice. They've kind of stripped all the nutrients out of it, and you're just left with CBD.
Yeah, CBD is not CBD is not CBD. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. It's not just one thing. And a lot of this is so diluted and everything else, because it's chemically stripped, like Kevin said, through a chemical reaction.
So you have the isolate, which is just the singular compound. Then you have broad spectrum, which is when they take a singular compound like CBD and they add a little bit of THC to it or a little bit of CBG to it, right? So you have broad spectrum. That one's a little bit better than isolate, but the gold standard is full spectrum. That's when they take the whole plant and they put it into the tincture. So you have trace amounts of CBN, CBG, all these other cannabinoids that are working together with the entourage effect.
And this is also goes back to that question of the difference between adult use recreational versus medical cannabis. You're going to find more of this information and use with the medical cannabis than you would with recreational. Recreational is just simply, buying product and walking out the door. That's what it is. And that's how we view it too. So when we deal with a medical cannabis person, they may do that as well, because initially for many people, that was just a soft sell in order to get the use of marijuana. But for the medical cannabis person that is using it for whatever might ail them, okay, they're the thinkers. They're the ones that want to know this so they can titrate this to themselves. And you probably, if nothing else from this conversation this evening, you probably figured out that we as individuals are all different and require different levels of different things. And that's where we work with each individual for that purpose. See, and we're passionate about, we're from Alpena. We like Alpena. We like the people that we live with here in Alpena, and we would like to help them, as I think the people in Alpena would like to help me or help Kevin or help anybody else that's here. We are, I just think we're a special community. And I think with that community, I think we feel that. And in this way, we feel like we're contributing to the community. And I as other people do in their ways, back to us. And I feel that's what makes us here in Alpena unique compared to other places. I mean, we can go romp around down in the metros and things like that, but I'll tell you, when I get back to Alpena, my tongue's hanging out and I'm damn glad I'm home. And I feel like that. And I feel like this, that I'm nurtured and taken care of here. And we feel like if we can be part of that by contributing to that and helping with that, aren't we even better as a place? And so that's one of the reasons we like doing this.